Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I show you my process for starting lavender from seed. So let's go. Did you know that there are different kinds of lavender? I never knew that until I started looking further into it. The most common one, at least here where I live in New Hampshire Zone 5B, is known as the English lavender. But I guess there are other varieties, such as the French, Dutch, and Spanish lavenders. Today's video is going to focus on the English lavender. English lavender is also commonly referred to as true or common lavender, and it's a perennial here in my zone. It typically is a perennial in zones 5 through 9. And there are two main cultivars of English lavender. There's Munstead as well as Hidcote. Hidcote is more tightly packed and it has a darker color flower than the Munstead lavender. Munstead lavenders have a lighter blossom and they also have more of a shaggy appearance to them. My personal experience has been that growing lavender from seed is not the easiest thing. And in fact, if you do a little research, you'll find it does have a reputation for being very tricky to grow from seed. My question for you is, have you ever grown lavender? And if so, have you ever grown it from seed? And if you grew it from seed, did you plant the seeds indoors or did you plant them outdoors? Did you use the winter sowing method? Did it work for you? Did it not work for you? I'd love to hear from you. And have you had success propagating lavender? Did you know you can take hardwood or softwood cuttings of lavender? That's something else in a different video that I'd like to experiment with. But for today, we're going to focus on starting lavender from seed. The English lavender comes in a lot of different colors. You usually will find it in a blue-purple color, lavender, violet blue, or even a whitish pink color. Lavender grows to be about 2 to 3 feet in height. It prefers full sun and it blooms around summertime. You often will find it along the edging of a pathway, but you'll also find it in a mass planting and sometimes even within a rock wall. Just like a lot of other plants out there, the lavender plant does attract bees, butterflies, as well as beneficial insects. What's nice about lavender is that the blossoms on the plant are edible. You can use it on a salad, soups, stews, in your baking, or even in your tea. One thing that I didn't realize about lavender, but that I found during my research, is that it makes an excellent companion plant, especially if you plant it near cabbage as well as roses. And also, it not only deters deer, it deters lots of other pests as well. As beautiful as lavender is, there are just so many different places where if we buy the plant, we might end up killing it because we love it too much. And when it comes to lavender, it is drought tolerant. So once it's established, it doesn't need a lot of water. Perhaps the first year when you plant it, you want to give it a good amount of water just to keep the plant happy. But after that first year, it's fairly drought tolerant and you don't want to give it too much water. Otherwise, the roots can rot. Also, the plant prefers dry, well-draining, alkaline soil. And it doesn't need to be high in organic matter. So if you're going to plant a lavender plant in your garden, when you first make the planting hole, it's okay to put a little bit of compost in that planting hole. But after that, this plant is very low maintenance and you actually don't want to give it too much fertilizer or too much organic material after that. And one word of caution, lavender is toxic to pets such as dogs and cats, so just beware of that. In terms of pruning this plant, you want to do it in the springtime and you want to prune it pretty hard. You don't want lavender to create that woody stalk to it. So after you buy a lavender plant, especially if it's a young plant, make sure you keep up with pruning it every single year. Otherwise, it will not look very good as the years go by. Okay, we've talked a lot about the plant and the kind of requirements it requires when you're planting it out in the landscape. Now let's talk about how to propagate this plant from seed. I have tried on a number of occasions to grow lavender from seed. I've tried doing it through the winter sowing method. I've also tried growing the seed indoors, and I've never had a lot of success with it. And I made a video recently showing you another plant that was tricky to start from seed, and that's delphinium. I'll put a link to that video down in the description below. I recently said in that video that that was going to be my tricky, hard plant that I was going to start from seed this year. Well, I lied. Lavender is the second one. I knew both of these plants are very hard to grow from seed, so I challenged myself to try. And I did a lot of research and I tried a couple of different methods just to see what would work the best. And that's why I'm making this video. I wanted to share with you the method that I tried and what seemed to work for me. The first thing that I found was lavender seeds need a cold, moist stratification period. And what that means is when you buy a packet of seeds, you don't want to just plant it into soil, give it some water, and then hope that those seeds will germinate. You may possibly have some seeds germinate, but your germination rate will be very, very low. And you might be wondering why. That's the biggest reason why, is that you didn't give those seeds that nice, cold, moist stratification period. You might have given them the wet part of it, but it needs to be cold. So what I did was I put my seeds in the refrigerator, and I used a Ziploc bag and a paper towel, but you could also use something like a coffee filter. And what I did was I wet this paper towel with water, but not too much water. If I had put too much water in here, it could rot the seeds. If I didn't put enough water in here, the seeds could dry out. So I wet the paper towel, and then I took my bag and went like this just to get any excess water out of the bag. And then I took the seeds and I just very liberally sprinkled the seeds on top of my paper towel. I sealed this bag up and I put it in my refrigerator, in the bottom part of my refrigerator where it stays the coldest. I just put it in one of the drawers where it's like the crisper drawer. And I'll tell you a couple of dates that, just so you know when I started these seeds. I put the seeds in my fridge on February 3rd, and then I put a note on here. I was going to leave the seeds in the fridge somewhere between 2 to 3 weeks. You don't want to leave the seeds in there much longer than that because the seeds can rot. You also don't want to just leave the seeds in there for 1 or 2 days. They need a period of time to get that cold stratification. So I left the seeds in my fridge for exactly 2 weeks. And then I pulled this bag out of the refrigerator, and the date was February 17th. And then what I did was I took, and I had a number of bags actually, and I took the bags and I put them under my LED shop lights. Now, lavender needs light to germinate. I did not want to cover this bag. I wanted to make sure that the seeds were getting nice bright light right away, but they were still staying moist inside of this bag. And then I just checked the bag about every day or so. And as soon as I saw that the seeds were creating like a little small tail on them, which is the root that's forming, I then would remove each of those seeds from the bag, and I would plant the seeds into a pre-moistened 6 cell pack that's full of potting mix. And that's basically what I did, was I just started planting the seeds that had sprouted with the little white tails into 6 packs like this. Even though it's been about a month since I pulled this bag out of the fridge, because today is March 14th, the plants are still very small. Lavender grows extremely slowly. So I'm okay with that. I have a very good germination rate. I'm very happy with this. And my goal is to grow these plants on, and I'm going to keep them inside so I can really monitor them, really baby them. And once they have a couple of sets of true leaves, not the first set of leaves, that's known as the cotyledon, but a couple of sets of true leaves, at that point, I will pot up each of these seedlings into 3-inch pots. Now, based on my research, I have found that I want to get these plants out in my garden definitely by the summertime so that the plants have enough time to establish themselves. Typically, you want to get your lavender seedlings out there sometime between spring and summer. I don't feel comfortable getting these out there during the spring, so I'm going to wait until the summer because I really want to baby them and get them to a good size indoors before I bring them outside. So let me share some other important information just so you have it. You want to sow the seeds indoors. When you buy the seeds and you're ready to sow them, you want to sow them indoors about 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost. Again, I gave myself more than plenty of time. So even though it says 6 to 8 weeks, I would give even more than that. I would even say more than 12 weeks, because there's a big period of time between letting the seeds stratify in the fridge, as well as then waiting for the seeds to germinate under the grow lights. That alone took me at least, I want to say, about 2 weeks before I started seeing seeds showing the little tails. So even though a lot of the sites say 6 to 8 weeks, I would say more like close to 12, if not 14 weeks. And then Again, you want to surface sow the seeds because they need light to germinate. Don't cover them. And if you do cover them with anything, maybe a very light layer of vermiculite. And it can take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks for those seeds to germinate. Not in the fridge necessarily, but especially once you bring them out of the fridge. The seeds do like to have a soil temperature somewhere between 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. My house does stay around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, but when it came to these bags here, I actually did put them on a heat mat because I wanted them to get that nice bottom heat. So that's another option that I would recommend. And if you don't have a heat mat, you can put it on top of a refrigerator or somewhere else where it stays warm. And the variety of seeds that I'm growing are, for the most part, they are the Munstead variety of lavender. So I experimented with a couple of things. Once I took these seeds out of the refrigerator and I put these bags on top of the heat mat, I also removed some of the seeds from the bag. And what I did was I planted them in seed starting mix. And I also put this container on top of a heat mat. I was just curious to see which method would be better. I didn't know if the seeds would germinate in the Ziploc bags, and I didn't know if the seeds would germinate inside of this type of container. It's just a restaurant to go container with holes in the bottom with seed starting mix. And I just put the seeds from the Ziploc bag on the surface and pressed them in. And what I found was both methods worked very well for me. I can't say that I preferred one over the other. I think that in the future, I would probably do both methods, or I could even pick just one method. But I can't say that one method worked better than the other. I had equally great results with both. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some close-up shots of what the seedlings look like. And I'm going to show you how I go about pricking out some seedlings from this tray and putting them into a tray like this. So here we are looking at a close-up shot at all the little seedlings that I had transplanted off of the paper towels. And then I planted them just barely under the potting mix, as you see here. And they're all looking very good. In a couple of cells, I have seeds that have not emerged yet, and that's okay. But overall, most of the cells have been filled up, and you can see that the plants are still very, very small. And that's just a close-up of the seedlings. And you can see that the first set of leaves, which are called the cotyledon, but then you can also see over here that like this plant is starting to get its first set of true leaves. Again, once the plants have 2 sets of true leaves, I will go ahead and bump up the plants from this 6 cell pack into 3-inch pots. And here's a close-up shot of the restaurant to-go container. You can see it's pretty shallow, and I had just covered it with clear plastic wrap just to keep the humidity in. And you can use any sort of a clear plastic dome or something that, as long as it lets light in and it keeps the humidity in there. And I had labeled it just with, again, it was an English lavender, and I had put the date of February 17th on here. And the reason that I have these dividers here is I had 3 types of lavender. One did not actually say the variety, so I had planted it over in one section. One of them said English lavender, and one said Munstead lavender. So I had just put them separately just so that I could differentiate between the 3. And I left some lavender in here just to show you what they look like. But I have over time, you can see there's little holes here. I have been pricking them out. I just use something like a pen to prick out the plant. And I very carefully then plant each of these seedlings into the 6 cell packs that I have. The key is you want to make sure that you're very gentle with your seedlings. They're very tiny, very delicate. And you want to make sure that the green part is above the soil and that the root is below the soil. So what I usually do is I just make a small hole, not very deep, in my seed starting or potting mix. You can use either one. And I'm just going to use my pen, and I want to get deep enough so that I can pull out the seedling. And typically when it comes to seedlings, you want to handle them by their leaf. You don't want to handle them by their stem, because if a small leaf breaks, it's okay. But if the stem breaks, the plant is dead. So you can see there's the green part that's going to be above the soil. And this part right here, the stem, that's okay if you bury that stem, and it can be nice and deep. It's actually better for the plant. And then the roots are in here in the soil, but you can see a little bit of the root is coming out there. And you always want to make sure that your seed starting or potting mix is wet. You don't want it to be dry. I like to use the back of the pen just to move the soil around the seedling. And that's it. And I'll end up doing the rest of these seedlings. I just wanted to show you my process for pricking out one of the seedlings and how I go ahead and put it in the soil. And again, you can see that just the green part is just barely above it. Now I realize in this video, I'm not showing you a ton. It's more of an instructional video to explain to you the process that I used and what worked for me. But I hope that this information was helpful. The few other things that I want to share is when it comes to watering my seedlings like this, I like to bottom water. You don't ever want to water your seedlings from the top. It causes a lot of fungal issues. It's not good for the plant. So you always want to bottom water. And when I say bottom water, I basically am removing a 6 cell pack. I'm pouring water in here. I'm putting this back. And the 6 cell packs have holes in the bottom of the containers, and they wick up the water. And then once I feel like they look nice and wet from the top and the tray feels heavy, I then dump out the rest of the water. You want to do it very carefully. You can just take the whole 10 by 20 tray and just very carefully dump out the water. You don't want these sitting in water. And the same applies with this type of container. I have holes in the bottom of this. I don't want to spray the top with water. So when I do need to water this, I'm going to bottom water it. I'm going to put this container in a bigger, basically it's a cookie sheet, and I put water in the cookie sheet and place this in there, and it wicks up the water from below. I will not be fertilizing these until they have a couple of sets of leaves on them. I will pot them up once they have a couple of sets of leaves. So other than that, it's a pretty straightforward process. And then the final thing that I wanted to share was when it comes to these bags here, as well as this container here, keep in mind that lavender is very slow to germinate. So even if we have a lot of lavender here, I think I still have a lot more lavender to germinate. So I'm going to keep these on my heat mat. I'm going to keep these with LED shop lights on top of them. And when I see that a seed or 2 or 5 have sprouted, I can remove them from the bag and get them planted in here. But I'm very excited about how many lavender plants I have. And I'm excited to give you updates on these plants in the future. So if you have any questions or comments at all, feel free to leave them below. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.